I'm hoping to already meet someone by the call. Yeah, because if I it's like
quick revision questions. So open up your books or just get some paper or a laptop open so you can write somewhere.
But I'm pretty sure
Why is David and me always up here?
me showing I have mom. Good morning.
I also want work.
What do you say? Like, you get like 90% of all your stats, 90% of your friends, and you get like 25%. Because there's marketing. I mean, everyone else is like using that.
Yeah, that's true. I got an average score in the trial. I always got like 17.
This guy would like
If you're doing what you try to
You guys read that?
another one next year. Good.
Alright, quick answer. It's not an exam style question, it's just a quick answer question, but I'd like you to write an answer. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Hey.
if we do it in Amazon, then they can afford to. If classical, we do it in Amazon, can afford to. Yeah, did you study that?
Yeah, he's studying for
Just do the Torah and
Are you ready? Anyone got an answer? Who wants to volunteer? You've got one, Abdul?
I had an answer.
Thanks for volunteering.
I said, because we are deceived by the resemblance we have to our previous selves rather than the fact that Hume believes that we have contiguity and our identity changes every moment. He thinks that even if one aspect of us changes, then we have a new identity. Humans tend to ignore these tiny changes and think that we're still identical to our previous selves.
Good. Did you say contiguity?
Yeah.
Yeah. Contiguity isn't something you can have, so you just haven't used the word quite right there. But if you left that part out, your answer would be 100% perfect. Yeah, so I'd probably still give you 100% if that was a question. But contiguity, yeah, means to be next to in time or space. Yeah, but you can't have contiguity. Yeah.
I use it in some.
You could say that myself from 10 seconds ago is contiguous with myself from 9 seconds ago. Yeah? But you can't have, it's like saying that you can't have that. Yeah? It's like saying that you have that space in time. It doesn't quite make sense. Yeah? You exist in that space of time. You can't have time as a property of yourself. Does that make sense to everyone? Kind of? You can be contiguous, you can't have contiguity. Okay? Just in terms of grammar, that's all. Alright, nice one. Did anyone have anything very different that they think might also be right? Okay, if you didn't have anything, then just copy what Abdul said. It was good. Let's look at paragraph 8, finishing off the first extract. Would anyone like, I'm a little bit sick today, would anyone like to read for me? Paragraph 8.
So we should just do the groups thing.
We should, Jeremy's in favour of the groups thing. That was why I suggested it.
Yeah.
But most people seem to be against it.
I don't mind.
Sorry, Jeremy.
What's the groups?
The groups thing was we all break into groups and you translate your paragraph and we come back together and you explain what it means.
Well, if we're not with you, you can't read it.
I'm happy to go through it all together, but I would like someone else to read for me. Maybe we'll just go around the room. And I think since Jeremy was so enthusiastic, we can skip him and we'll start with Kevin.
Come on, boys.
Come on.
Yeah, let's do the group thing. Come on, it's my class.
Maybe we'll just put them all the way down. Whichever one.
Oh, whoa.
Oh god.
Quite tired.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Kevin first. From 8.
Look at that. I like this. I like this a lot.
In order to this, suppose any mass of matter, of which the parts are contiguous and connected, be placed before us. This plane we must attribute perfect identity to this mass, provided all the parts continue uninterruptedly and invariably the same. Whatever motion or change of place we may observe, either in the whole or in any of the parts.
Alright, nice. So, if something's contiguous, it's next to in time or space, right? What's Hume saying here? He's saying that if things move through time or space, should we consider them to be identical or not? Let's read it again. So, in order to this, he's trying to figure out why we make up this fiction of identity. Yeah. So in order to do this, suppose any mass of matter, any object, like this pen for example, it's a mass of matter, of which the parts are contiguous and connected, like they're the same or they're next to each other in time or space. Yeah. It's plain that we have to attribute a perfect identity to this mass, this pen, provided all the parts continue uninterruptedly and invariably the same, unchanging, whatever motion or change of place we may observe in the whole or its parts. Doesn't change, then we have to say it's identical. Nice one. So this is actually pretty important for Hume. He's saying that if a mass of matter continues through time and space, invariably the same and uninterrupted, yeah, it continues to be exactly what it is, yeah, then we have to say that it's identical. That does have identity. Everyone good with that?
So,
yeah.
So this chair is identical to now.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
now.
Exactly. So this chair, perfect, is identical from now to now to now to now to now to now. Right? It's even identical now. Right? It's moved through time and space, and it's still identical. But are you ready? Now it's not identical. Because it's not continuing invariably the same.
Wait, what about us? If I'm just like this for like
changing.
Are you changing?
Well, the cells are.
no, not in like 2 seconds. What? 2 seconds is still.
Here's the really
So what
quick.
if
If I
I-
change it back,
Hey.
is it identical?
What if I'm true?
Let me just quickly make this point, and then we'll get to your one. I just rubbed off all the marker, right? Let's imagine that it's exactly the same as it was before. Would Hume say that it's now the same as it was before?
No.
Why?
Because it's not now.
Because
Not
it's not perfectly contiguous in that it's been interrupted. Do we all see that? It's not continued on. Yeah? So even though I've changed it back and it's exactly the same as it was before, right? It's been interrupted. Yeah, its identity is being interrupted. So for Hume, I think we have to say, according to this little bit, that he would say that it's a different thing. Now, on to Abdul's. He's going to say that if our body does not change at all, if it's completely invariable and uninterrupted, it has identity. He's not that interested in the body though, right? Whoops. Most of us are more interested in our mind because we think the mind is where we are. Yeah, that's like the heart of you. So he's going to say that if your mind continues uninterrupted and unchanging, then you are you. Does your mind do that? According to Hume, what would he say?
There's new thoughts, new perceptions. It's like theatre.
Exactly. It's like a theatre. Your mind's like a theatre.
What
It's a bundle of perceptions and they're constantly changing and in flux. For example, you're getting constantly different sound waves from my voice, from the two-way up here. You're getting constantly different perceptions of my hands moving around, etc. Different colours, which means that your mind is constantly changing. Yeah? And, he says, there's no one impression that you could narrow in on and say, that's not changing, so I have a self. Yeah? Because all of our impressions are always changing, and that's all we are, is our impressions. We have no identity. Make sense? Yep.
What if, like, I'm alone in this room, there's no sound, there's no nothing, it's like total silence, and I'm looking at the whiteboard, the same place in the whiteboard, for 5 seconds, doing absolutely nothing, not thinking about anything, just looking at dot 5 seconds. Is that am I identical?
Hume would say yes. So in the example that we're making, right, your point is that your perceptions continue the same. Yeah? If Abdul's perceptions, if his impressions, his sensations continue the same, for as long as they continue the same, he is the same person. But that's only to say person, right, in that his impressions are continuing. Yeah, his impressions have identity with themselves. And insofar as he's just a bundle of those impressions, the impressions that are him stay the same. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, good example. Any other questions on that one? Making sense to everyone? Cool. Let's keep reading. Nick from Butt.
But supposing some very small or inconsiderable part can be added to the mass or subtracted from it, though this absolutely destroys the identity of the whole. Strictly speaking, yet as we seldom think so accurately, it is skillful not to pronounce a massive matter of the shit the same, where we find so trivial an alteration.
Nice. Daniel, what's that saying?
The whatever is added to us will not be something.
Yeah, if you add anything, any change, if there's any change in something, it's not the same anymore, right? But do we normally say things are the same if they have a tiny little change? Do we normally say things are the same if they've got a tiny little change?
Yes.
Yeah, normally we do, right? Like you'd still say this is Mr. Collar's hand even if I drew on it a little bit, right? It doesn't seem to make a difference. Yeah? So even though, when we think about it, according to Hume, if I draw on my hand, it can't be the same thing because any change equals difference. You guys remember the 100 plus 0.001? It's a tiny change, but it means they're not equal, so they're not the same. All good? Cool. Next bit then, the passage of the thought from the object before the change to the object after it, like our impressions of something, it's so smooth and easy that we hardly perceive the transition, the change, and are apt to imagine that 'tis nothing but a continued survey of the same object. Yeah, it's like a constant optical illusion of the imagination, where we just think, we see that these things are easily connected in our mind. It's a really smooth transition. We see a tiny change, we're just like, that wasn't really a change. To the point where we think there was no change. It's the same thing. Everyone see that? Sweet. I'd like you to answer, please, this question for paragraph 8. Based on this paragraph, when does Hume think identity is lost? He does think things have identity, so when is identity lost? Work with the people next to you if you like to make sure, and just write down a quick answer.
Very good.
What is it for? Folding inside.
So when it's
No, I'm not going
When you
to
experience new perceptions, sensations,
so when new things are added to you.
and perceiving you talk like this. Now, perceiving you
A massive change. Or even the reverse.
They don't move anymore.
balance the scale of that.
Ladders.
Left.
I just did a bit of
Okay.
it.
What about classical cues? Any classical language that's only, what about Greek classical cues? No, what about it? That's methods. They help some methods in 4 about 5.
I gotta get at least 4.
And you guys did follow the practice that?
I was thinking, I got one
Soaking mine
Tuesday.
Yeah, what chapter
The
are
one
you?
that was down for
A class.
Yeah.
well,
After the 10B.
Where can it be?
Yeah,
Wait, what?
No,
after the sack.
No, I thought you said that earlier on this Saturday. You said because the teachers discussed that because not all classes are at the same pace, they're only gonna, in this set, they're only gonna have the first law of differentiation. Would you read it by first principles? They're not gonna have more than that. Is it
Not by first principle, he just means first reading.
Yeah, first reading.
Question, paragraph 8.
The first one was
Not sure?
we haven't done this yet.
We'll
That's
do
not
it.
all.
Right?
It's good image of that.
Alright, 15 then. Who are we up to? Andy. Can you read the first two sentences?
We now proceed to explain the nature of personal identity, which has become so great a question in philosophy, especially of late years in England, where older abstruse scientists are studying with a peculiar allure and application.
Nice. Abstruso just means a bit like abstract. Yeah, the abstract sciences, or the conceptual sciences maybe. Ardor means passion, and application means to make a difference in the real world, yeah? Just saying, hey, personal identity study is really popular at the moment. Yeah, next one?
And here this evident the same method of reasoning must be continued, which has so successfully explained the identity of plants, and animals, and ships, and houses, and all the compounded and changeable production, either of art or nature.
Nice one. So saying the identity of the mind is going to be the same as identity of masses of matter, like the pencil. Yeah? In that we have identity if nothing changes, and it's different if something does. All good with that so far? Alright. The identity which we ascribe to the mind of man is only a fictitious one, a fake one, and of a like kind with that which we ascribe to vegetables and animal bodies. You guys remember the example of the tomatoes from last time that I made up? Yeah, that's not a Hume example. But he does talk about animals and vegetables and things having this fake kind of identity that we imagine. Yeah? It's pretty easy to see, I think, in terms of plants, right? Like the acorn is obviously different to the oak tree. Even though you might be tempted to say it's the same tree as it grows. Yeah? Hume thinks that's a made-up thing of our mind. They're obviously different. He thinks the same thing of animals. He's going to say the same thing about people. Yeah? It cannot, therefore, have a different origin, but must proceed from a like operation of the imagination upon like objects. He's just saying our imagination gets it wrong when we think about ourselves, in the same way it gets it wrong when we think about vegetables, plants, all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? So, question then. Do you guys remember the ship of Theseus, that example? Where the ship is sailing around for 8 years on its voyage and it gets replaced slowly, bit by bit, and then when it comes back into dock, you have to say, is it the same ship or not? Even though all the parts have been replaced. What would Hume think about that? When does the ship become different for Hume?
As soon as the first part gets
Yeah, as soon as the first part gets replaced, right? There's been a change, so because it's different, it's not identical. Everyone see
As
that?
soon as the other part gets replaced, and it's
Different again.
It has like 8 different identities.
Well, it has probably more. It's got as many identities as there are parts replaced, doesn't it? Yep.
Doesn't that change?
Nice one. So that's what his response to the ship of Theseus would be. Yeah. So how is our mind like the ship according to Hume? It's constantly changing, right? Our mind, our perceptions, our impressions, if they get changed, just like a board or a rudder or a sail on a boat, then it becomes something different, right? So how quickly is our identity changing then? Really fast. Inconceivable rapidity is his word. Yeah? Inconceivably fast. Yeah, every time you have a new perception, your mind changes, and therefore your identity changes. All good? Can we write that down quickly? How is our mind like the ship according to Hume? Let's write down notes for that one.
Oh yeah. Is it tomorrow? What? It's not somebody else.
I don't care what another change.
Oh,
What would you get for what?
I won.
They pick your house.
No, that's the more recent one.
Good actually.
Whatever he gets this year is what we have.
That sucks.
everything is open.
Yeah, but it would be bad if you did do worse than see it, to be honest. You would be able to really play
What
it.
you like get the food game last week? It's too garbage.
No, but it's
do
worth it. But I
Oh,
thought I don't think I'd get
We're
bored.
the best thing.
Sellers going with me. Yeah, but you were understanding better.
Didn't do.
I know, but like I
Like,
got
you
bored
know,
of Rising
what about
Sun.
the sources?
He's going United.
Psychology relearning. So,
What I say is comfy, man.
No, just I got sick of it.
No, the league. You see,
it's just
Ramos? That's the league in Free China.
Last year, all I remember was like
imagine getting a year free time with both still right.
But how good would Koulibaly do it?
yeah, that was
Top
out.
eight.
She needs to do it.
Yeah, the league.
It's on the
So boring.
To live and
Yeah, obviously.
It's good for
but
us,
our partnership would be
The fullback would be slacking.
but like
and Luke Shaw there at Dallas. Oh, Diego Dallas.
Yeah, see, that's the weakness.
He's a young
I'm
prospect.
sure.
He's like that. Wait, you want to play with the
For United. Well, he played better. It's not all from Except for Ronaldo.
He's better than Tiger.
Who? It's debatable. Because Shaw's not bad. Bruce. And Robertson's better than Bruce.
Model.
Huh?
He's like a model.
And Robertson's better than Bruce.
I think he's old, but
He doesn't score well. And he barely scores well. Yeah, he's good at it. You saw on Sunday. It's crazy, man. Like if you lose this position, you're just gapping it. Something needs to change that on the million first It's all boy. Shit, imagine if I'm 700 mils of my first. Right. I can't believe it. What do you want Carl Wilson?
saying at the start of the year.
Nah, he's a starter.
No, we got the source.
Start him over time.
Secondary team is better than
Ah, yeah, no. Are you guys on in? Yeah. Right, just get off the shit. Wilson and Son. Wilson needs to start.
I don't want that needs to be changed.
Really, your weakness would be something.
Have Son.
No, well,
So, Lucas.
I'm trying to make it like top.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
the
fine,
same
yeah.
response.
Hey, what day is it? Boston, man.
Good to go?
November something.
My birthday.
Is everyone happy with this bit for 15? Yep, excellent. Megan, 16?
How far am I reading?
Can you do 2 sentences for me?
But lest this argument should not convince the reader, though in my opinion perfectly decisive.
Decisive? Yep.
Let him weigh the following reasoning, which is still closer and more immediate. It is evident that the identity which we attribute to the human mind, however perfect we may imagine it to be, is not able to run the several different perceptions into one and make them lose their character of distinction and difference, which are essential to them.
Cool, nice one. That first sentence just means, well, if you're not convinced yet, try this on for size, right? In Jeremy's words, probably. I can imagine you saying that, Jeremy.
So,
I reckon you'd say that, try this on for size.
oh yeah, for sure.
So he's just saying, if you're not convinced yet, have a gander at this, yeah? So this bit below, he says it's not the human mind, however perfect we think it is, however good it is, it's not able to run the several different perceptions into one. Perceptions being like impressions, yeah? and make them lose their characters of distinction and difference which are essential to them. Yeah, so does everyone have a good sense that impressions are all very distinct? Right? Your impression of my face is very distinct from your impression of anyone else's face. My voice sounds very different to anyone else's voice. Does that make sense? Sounds are all different, and their distinctness, their difference is what defines them, right? That's what makes them a different impression to something else. So if you take away that distinctness, the difference of an impression, it loses what it is. It loses its meaning. Does everyone see that? So you can't have an impression without it being different to other impressions. Does everyone get that point? Okay, let's keep reading. 'Tis still true that every distinct perception, every different impression, which enters into the composition of the mind, just which you appreciate with your mind, is a distinct existence. A distinct existence, and is different and distinguishable, we can tell the difference, and separable from every other perception, either contemporary, now, or successive, in the future, in the past. Yeah? All of our impressions are different to each other. Is everyone good with that? It's obvious that that happens. You can write a little note next to that. All of our impressions are different to each other. Is it the same?
Exactly. Well, you feel better.
I guess it would be if you couldn't tell the difference, right?
Because you're like,
If you can't tell the difference, then that means like there is no difference.
I don't think that's you just be like, oh, I just trust what they're gonna happen.
Yeah, your impression of them at least is identical. Maybe they're not in like their full wholeness. Yeah, like one might have a different name to the other. Might have different personalities, etc. But your impressions would be identical. If you really can't tell the difference. But if you can tell a tiny little difference, completely different. Yeah. Guys, had a good example over here I might let everyone know about. The question was, what if you saw two twins and you couldn't tell the difference between them? Would the impression be irreducibly distinct, like very different? What do you think Hume would say?
Yeah, you see different atoms.
Yeah, they would have different atoms in them, that's true. Their actual ontological existence would be different, right? But your impression of them, if you couldn't tell the difference, then they'd be the same. Your impression would be the same at least, right? If you can tell the difference though, then they're different because there's a tiny little bit different, so they're completely different. Yeah?
So not all of that experience.
So maybe it's possible to have an identical impression at multiple times. Yeah? Or maybe it's possible to have an identical impression for a period of time. Like, have you ever heard like a siren go off just with one tone? It's just like, eh. You guys heard that over the period of like a second, right? And the impression stayed pretty much the same. Kind of. Yeah? Maybe my voice went up or down a bit, but you get what I mean. Alright, we ready to keep going? Excellent. But as, notwithstanding this distinction and separability, we suppose that the whole train of perceptions to be united by identity, a question naturally arises concerning this relation of identity. So our impressions are distinct and different, right? But maybe it's not the impressions themselves, maybe it's like the way that the impressions are united by the mind that gives you identity. Whether it be something that really binds our several perceptions together or only associates their ideas in the imagination. That is, in other words, whether in pronouncing concerning the identity of a person, we observe some real bond among his perceptions, or only feel one among the ideas we form of them. Alright, so why do you guys think that you assume you are a continuing person over time? Sorry?
Most of our things are
You're the same, right? You're having perceptions now, right? And they're very different to the perceptions you had when you first woke up this morning, right? But it's still you having them, isn't it? Does everyone see that? That's the objection that Hume is trying to fight off. He's saying that there is no you underneath. We're just imagining a you continuing underneath. But we want to say, no, there's something that binds our perceptions together. Yeah? There's something that means that my perceptions when I woke up this morning, even though they're really different to me now, are more mine than your perceptions are to me right now. Yeah? Because our perceptions are different. My perceptions right now compared to when I woke up are different. But I'm still connected to the person that woke up, and I'm not connected to you because I have identity. Yeah? I have something which binds me together, which we call like the mind or our self, right? Maybe a soul, maybe some other substance. Yeah? Alright. So he's saying, well, maybe there's some sort of bond. Yeah? What does he think of this? Let's keep going. This question we might easily decide if we would recollect what's already been proved at large. So earlier in this massive book that he wrote, he's already talked about this idea, so let's keep going. That the understanding never observes any real connection among objects, and that even the union of cause and effect, when strictly examined, resolves itself into a customary association of ideas. Alright, I'd like you to highlight that bit, please. The understanding never observes any real connection among objects. And the next bit as well. Alright, so Hume gets a little bit nitpicky with the way we do science. Maybe not nitpicky, maybe just accurate. And he thinks that when we're doing science, right, when we're trying to figure out how the world works, we base our findings on empirical evidence, our observations of the world. That's how the scientific methods work. Is everyone good with that? So to get evidence, we have to use our perceptions and impressions of the world. And then based on those perceptions and impressions, we form theories about the way the world works, right? So we look at the stars going through the sky, and we form the impressions of like bright dots, right? And from those bright dots, and using telescope to make those bright dots more distinct and clearer, and by tracing their roots on paper, we develop theories like gravity and the idea of a sun-centered solar system. Is everyone good with that? We don't like see the sun-centered solar system necessarily. We develop that as a theory to explain our observations. We all good? Following me so far? Excellent. Let's just do the pen exam. Oh, let's do the chair again. This bit's tricky, but follow Hume on this, right? When you see, I want you to look and find two things happening. I want you to see two things, okay? So two things are going to happen, and I want you to tell me what the two things were. Are you ready? One involves my foot, and the other involves the chair. Here we go. Ryan, what two things did you see?
You kicked the chair and the chair moved.
Very good. Nice. I moved my leg like this, and I kicked the chair. And then, second thing, the chair moved, right? And why did the chair move, Ryan?
Because of your kick.
Yeah. Hume says you imagine that. Hume denies cause and effect. He says you can see very clearly two things happening, right? But you can't see the causation. You can't see something causing something else. You just see one thing happening and another thing happening. You don't actually see the cause and effect, right? It's maybe easy to explain with like a magnet, right? if you've got a magnet like on a board, you can pull another thing along the board, right? You can't see the connection between the two things. You just see a magnet moving and a bit of metal moving. Does that make sense to everyone? Hume says that cause and effect and causation is something that we imagine. It's not necessarily a real property of the world. He says it's a theory that we make up in the imagination. It doesn't explain the real world. So things happen in the world, but cause and effect, he says, isn't a real property. Are we following? Who believes Hume? Cause and effect is a made-up thing. Who thinks that some things cause other things? Most people, right? So most people tend to be like, okay, I liked Hume up until now, and then over you go. Over to the crazy corner, please, Hume. Right? But he really thinks that cause and effect is something we imagine. It's a theory, it's not something we observe directly. Yeah? Can you write, please, a note on that? It's a really important point.
If Saul died,
Yeah.
it was Saul talking. If you see the video, you actually told Ramos first, and Ramos.
Yeah, but Ramos
cause and
fell
effect.
over.
Cause and effect.
Yeah, but Ramos fell over. Ramos fell over.
Sanchez is
Yeah, it's really warm. Sanchez.
Right, so the news that all the things are
Right.
Wow.
You should definitely look at all the
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he's gonna back on when it's cold outside.
Yeah.
cold.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Maybe we'll know what Mr. Champion said.
Van Dijk was like, I'm scared of nobody.
He said he's like, oh,
So you take down Messi.
take off your jump
Yeah,
inside because when you're warm inside and you go outside it becomes really cold.
Whoa.
Same thing my mom tells me.
That's why you put on your jumper outside so you can be warm outside, not cold.
Wait, does he tell you that?
Yeah, he told us that this year, but in a better way.
What do you mean by that?
He's gonna be all by
I
himself.
explained it wrong. It doesn't make sense. But I know what he means. Yeah, I know what he means.
Huh?
You climatize the environment.
Yeah, no,
Yes, that's the better way to word it.
Does he still say that for multiple choice questions you have to share with him?
Yes.
What?
He says he doesn't accept multiple choice questions about working out. He says that you could have just copied the back of the book.
Yeah, I thought it's in the
Last year, Mr. No checked my work and saying he took Andy's work was like none of working out. Yeah, we had the exact same. He just didn't like something.
You still owe me a gift for that.
Yeah.
Simple question.
Imagine having a class.
Don't go too hard. Yeah.
Have you guys seen this before? This guy has this magic ball, right? And he's going to make it float. Can you see?
It's a ladle.
So,
Whoa.
he makes it float with the effect of his hands have this magic power, right? And he makes this thing float in the air. And there's nothing above it or below it.
Wait, what?
What? We didn't say.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Stop playing games with the little money for the carrier.
It's good. What's it? Feels
Alright.
No, he's got it onto his shoulder.
Ah.
Maybe I'll see if there's a better one.
Let's see more. I think Herbert getting that
Alright, why don't I show you the ladle trick? It is wrong, that's right. We imagine, right? You imagine at the start of the video, before you see what's obviously going on, that there's a connection between the two things you're seeing, right? Like the hands and some magic association force or something, and this magic floating ball, right? Now it turns out you're mistaken. And actually the thing holding this magic floating ball in there is just the handle of the ladle, which is just up the arm, yeah? Try the trick at home, it's really easy. You'll amaze and amuse your family, yeah? Be really fun. But do you guys all see how we easily imagine that there's some sort of force acting between like the hand and the ball, right? Even if you're really sus about it, you're like, whoa, that's really cool, it's floating in the air, yeah? You really quickly imagine that. Hume thinks we do that with everything that seems to be caused or affected, yeah? So there is no handle on the ladle for Hume. There's no causes or effects. There's just things happening. That's all we observe, yeah? And he says it's not rigorous of us. It's not rational. We can't prove that cause and effect happens. All we can prove is that we have impressions of some things and impressions of others later, yeah? Now we might imagine that cause and effect happens, and we can imagine a theory of cause and effect to help us explain how the world works, but we don't see cause and effect in the world. Does that make sense to everyone? Alright, so we might imagine a theory of cause and effect, but we don't see it in the world. Good to keep going? Alright. So that's what he means when he says that the understanding never observes any real connection among objects, and that even the union of cause and effect, when strictly examined, looked at, resolves itself into a customary association of ideas. We just imagine cause and effect. Alright, from thence, it evidently follows from this that identity is nothing really belonging to these different perceptions and uniting them together, but is merely a quality. Maybe highlight that bit, underline that. Identity is merely a quality which we attribute to them, to the perceptions, because of the union of their ideas in the imagination when we reflect upon them. So if we're saying that all these different perceptions are somehow linked by something, even though we can't see any linking properties, what are the things that trick us into thinking that these things are linked? There were three. Resemblance is one, contiguity, and causation. Yeah? Now the only qualities which can give ideas a union in the imagination are these three relations above mentioned. These are the uniting principles in the ideal world, which just means in the conceptual world, in the world of the mind. And without them, every distinct idea is separable by the mind and may be separately considered and appears not to have any more connection with any other object than if disjoined by the greatest difference and remoteness. It is therefore on some of these three relations of resemblance, contiguity, and causation that identity depends. And as the very essence of these relations consists in their providing an easy transition of ideas, it follows, and I underlined this bit at the end, that our notions of personal identity, our idea of personal identity, come entirely from the smooth and uninterrupted progress of the thought along a train of connected ideas, according to the principles above explained. So resemblance, contiguity, causation. So what psychs us out, what tricks us into thinking that we have identity, according to Hume? Resemblance, contiguity, and causation are the principles, the qualities that to us make it seem as though our perceptions are joined together by some uniting force. Yeah? Cool. Maybe just to make this a bit obvious, and just to recap, to make sure we're all getting it, I want you to imagine that you have like 1 second snapshots of perception all day, right? And so the amount of seconds that you're paying attention during the day, that's the amount of like snapshots of perception that we have. Yeah? So from now, you've had 5 snapshots of perception, according to this model that I'm making up. Are we all good with that? Now, I want you to imagine that I took all of the snapshots of your whole day, right? I took all of your seconds of perception, and then I mixed them, I jumbled them all up, right? And then I just put them in a random order, and then I fed them into your mind in that order. So every second, you have a different set of perceptions based on where you are in the day or whatever. Yeah? Every second all your perceptions would be different. Yeah? Can you guys see how weird it would be to say you'd be like, you wouldn't really attribute your self-identity, even, maybe. Does that make sense to people? So like 1 second you'd have the sound of me saying this, and then the next second you'd be in your methods class, and then the second after that you'd be out at lunch and you'd bite into an apple, but then the second after that you'd be at home, and then the second after that you'd be like getting into bed, but then the second after that you'd be back in philosophy class. None of your perceptions would be connected by anything. Yeah? Yeah? And so you might begin to doubt that you are the same thing through time, because none of your perceptions would resemble any of the perceptions that come before or after. None of your perceptions would seem to cause any of the other perceptions. Yeah? None of them would be next to, contiguous. Does that make sense? So he thinks it's the fact that our perceptions seem to be really connected to the perceptions that we have on either side in time or space. They resemble them. They kind of sound the same. Yeah? And they seem to be caused. Like the words I have at the end of my sentences seem to relate to the words at the start of my sentences. So you think that it's part of like one stream of time or something, connected by your identity. We all good? Getting a lot of blank faces. Are you falling asleep behind your eyes, guys? A little bit? Alright. Are we all following along with the basic idea? Okay, 17 then. The only question, therefore, which remains is, by what relations this uninterrupted progress of our thought is produced when we consider the successive existence of a mind or thinking person. And here it is evident we must confine ourselves to resemblance and causation. We must drop contiguity, which has little or no influence in the present case. He thinks that resemblance and causation are the two qualities that most trick us into thinking that we have some sort of identity binding our perceptions together. Yeah? Can we write a little note next to that, please? Resemblance and causation are the two qualities which most trick us.
No one, just look back to storm.
Alrighty. Can we get out this one, the evaluation table? going to have a bit of a break from reading, partly because my voice is getting a bit tired, but also I'm just seeing lots of tired faces. So, a little bit of a break. I'd like you please to outline in your own words the first 4 arguments in this evaluation table. Yeah. If you finish that and you want to write down some evaluation notes, like where you would challenge these arguments, like I agree with this, I disagree with this, that'd be good too. But I just want you to outline these arguments in your own words, so you make sure you understand them. First 4. Everyone understand? Cool. Work with the people next to you if you want. Oh.
Outline that. Oh, yeah.